That's Colin Kincaid, who's the Vice President and CTO of the Global Service Provider entity within Cisco. Very welcome, Colin.
Thank you, Frederick. Hey. Thanks a lot.
Welcome.
All right. You gonna change it, Thomas? So that was pretty interesting to get the live feedback. I wonder, first of all, who all the superior people are. I want to count how many white shirts there are in the room before we go too far. And if you want a white shirt to be an Ask the Expert, we'll look at the survey results. Now, I did not do any using Menti for a couple of reasons. One is that most of my time building presentations is on an airplane, and testing out Menti from an airplane doesn't work really well. But I do a much more sort of classic analog approach to this, which is how many people in the room know how to raise their hand? Okay, this gives me a baseline. That was about a 80% participation. I didn't really catch how many people up there are participating. So let's try it again. How many people know how to raise their hand? Oh, it's about 50% up top and about 80% down there. So we kind of get a view. So what I wanted to do is talk a little bit about NSO and how we see it at Cisco. But I always start by asking a few very existential questions. So who am I? That's the most important question to answer. So let me tell you a little bit about myself, just so you understand my perspective around some of these things. So I think Frederick said I'm the CTO and Global Service Provider Systems Engineering Leader, which means that all of the sales systems engineers that work with our customers and Global Service Provider are part of our organization. I work with them. And also, I was a developer for 20 plus years, and I'd tell you what portion of that my career is, but it would probably be a little embarrassing. But it's a significant part of my career. And I like to hang out with the cool people, which are the developers, who actually know what's going on and what things need to get done. Now, I do also occasionally, because of my job, talk to your CEOs and CTOs. So I get a very different perspective from both ends of these things. So developer conferences are great because you are the people that are solving the real problems on a day in, day out basis, really making things happen, and give us some of the best feedback on what we can do differently, but also how the product is being used. And then the other existential question is, why am I here? All right, and very important to answer that question. And it's really about, NSO is a foundational bet for Cisco. We acquired really Tail F, the company, several years ago because we saw that the idea of automation was very, very important to where the industry is going. It was originally acquired into our service provider organization, but if you just to understand what that means is we are very focused on global service providers, but we've moved the NSO organization internally into a different organization, so it spans into our cloud organization, so it spans both our enterprise and our service portfolio. So if we look at our customer base in this room, it's distributed across those two things. So we're really looking at that. But it's also something that we are using internally as well. We have 8 products that are built on top of NSO that we sell. So it's not just a tool and a platform and a capability that we are selling to our customers. It's also a platform that we are using internally. So if you're using products like VMS, which is for Virtual Managed Services, just been renamed. I can't even remember what the new name is. But Ultra, which is our virtual mobile packet core, uses NSO for doing deployment and setup. We have other products like VTS, which is a topology manager. So it's like an SDN controller for data centers. That uses NSO at its core as well. So we're not just a seller of NSO as a company. We are a consumer of NSO in order to recognize its value and pre-package it in a number of ways. We have more than 130 customers globally, and That's a growing number. I think that number is great for the time. We see it getting much bigger for a few reasons. One is it's really important to us in terms of how we drive the view of what automation can be in our customers. But it's also really something that we believe is differentiating about Cisco because of the value of the NSO product is in its ability to span products across many different companies. So it truly is a platform that you can use for all of your needs as opposed to just Cisco needs. And we see that as an ongoing place. And we have about a 70% service provider customer base and about 30% enterprise base. And that's what it looks like in about this room. And if we just look at Europe alone, because we're in Europe, we have really across quite a few national operators. So we're inside of quite a few of the sort of national operators. And if you look at the global level, it goes out across that 130 customers. Really important. And really, automation is foundation of a lot of what we're talking about at Cisco these days. If you go to almost any conference, any provider of equipment is starting to talk about automation. You're starting to see automation in all of the analyst articles. You're starting to see it in every sort of what's important in terms of differentiation is the ability to automate. And I want to talk about sort of two pieces. One is sort of infrastructure automation, and the other is service automation, because they're different things. We often spend time just talking about automation like it's this sort of universal thing. It's just one thing. But we talk about it very much in the way of automating at different layers. We automate all the way down. You can automate tasks within an individual device. You can automate tasks across a number of devices or across your infrastructure. Or you can automate all the way up at the service layer. So what are you trying to deliver? So if, for instance, you're talking about delivering a video service to a customer, it's everything from the video server across your entire network. What are you billing them for? All the way through to the end customer and their end experience. So it's really across all of those things when we talk about the automation of the service. Now, let me just talk to you a little bit about how we see automation evolving in the industry and the way we see our customers. Now, we invested in another company quite a while ago called Meraki. Meraki is a company that you can just look at it in the simplest form is it's a non-presence Wi-Fi and some SD-WAN capabilities. The value of it is 100% automated. And if you look at our portfolio, that covers the very bottom end, so everything down from small, medium business and up into sort of smaller businesses. Then we also see in the web companies, so the hyperscale companies, the Googles, the Amazons, the Facebooks, these companies, they invested massively in internal automation and have built all of their own automation. But there's a huge chunk of that market in between that doesn't have a set of either pre-canned tools or built their own. And that's where we see NSO really filling in between those two ends of the market. And that's really a massive market in terms of large enterprises, in terms of service providers, and it really gives a platform to address those needs in between those two spaces. So let me talk a little bit about the term automation. Automation comes from D.S. Harding. How many of you know about D.S. Harding? Okay, I'm going with a baseline that gives 2 people. Okay. So this is from Ford Automotive. So we think of automation as just a general word. It was really invented in 1946 by D.S. Harding, writing a manual about how they're looking to change Ford's manufacturing. And it really got down to writing about replacing humans with robots. So that concept didn't really exist before then. And the word automation is new. It comes from the automobile industry, which was to be automobile. Automation is auto machine, really driving the idea of getting humans out of the way and putting more machines in there. Much more reliable, sort of much more scalable. And this is sort of a key concept towards everything we start to talk about as we look forward in cross of networks, because a lot of it is about getting humans out of the way and making things much more reliable, much more scalable, much less error prone. So this is affecting everything across the industry. And when people talk about automation now, well, everybody's favorite thing to talk about is the self-driving vehicle. and the autonomous vehicle. Now, how many of you think that an autonomous vehicle represents true automation? Okay, I got 2 people. So I'm going to have to re-baseline. How many know how to raise your hands? We're down to about 50%. All right. So the interesting thing is an autonomous vehicle doesn't represent automation per se because it doesn't do anything for you without having a service to deliver, right? Because a self-driving vehicle doesn't provide transportation unless it's part of a service construct. So a self-driving vehicle just knows how to stop when something's in front of it, but it doesn't know where to go on its own. And it may avoid things, but it doesn't take you to anywhere. So if you just get into a self-driving vehicle without any higher level concept, it doesn't do anything for you. So automation is not just the thing at the bottom that actually has capabilities. It's actually how you deliver that end-to-end picture. So who recognizes this? All right, who wants to, where is it? London, okay? So this is the City of London. So City of London, as you can see, is a network. It's a very complex network with lots of services spread out across that network. And this is just very much like your network, right? It's got a lot of places to go across. It's got major transit routes. It's got sort of smaller transit routes. It's really built to go across the entire city to various different points where you might get services and look at services across the city, where you might live. It grew organically. How many of you have networks that grew organically? I think probably almost every one of you, right? If you have a network, it's probably had a very original plan, got there, and then some things grew organically around that. So it's very similar to how a lot of cities are built. Now, if you think about London and what's one of the key services in this in terms of is transportation, really getting from one point to another is a key part of transportation. So the City of London is this network that has transportation, which is about going from one point to another. So the London cabbie. So I think many of you have probably never been to London, but in London, one of the most iconic things is the black cab. And the black cab is always manned by a London cabbie. Now, this is a very important thing, and I'll kind of walk you through it. But they don't use GPS, and they don't use maps. If you get into a London cab, no matter where you are in the City of London, if you give them an address in the City of London, they just take you there. Okay? They don't look anything up. They don't plug anything into it. They don't use Waze or they don't use anything else. They take you there. They have memorized the entire City of London. So the entire City of London has been memorized by the London cabbie. And this is what's called the knowledge. So if you take the time to Google, not right now, the knowledge is the test that every single London cabbie has to pass in order to get there to be able to be a qualified taxi driver. They have to be able to draw out between any 2 points as part of a test the route that they would drive. This is a standard test. And so as you can imagine, this takes quite a bit of time to study, quite a bit of time to learn, but they are absolute experts and have the entire city memorized. Now, who does this remind you of? Now, you may recognize the network engineer, right? This is the classic network engineer who has spent their entire time becoming an expert on the network, memorizing it, and becoming incredibly familiar with it. And really looking to, their sort of core knowledge is their ability to navigate from any point to another, to be able to build anything, to understand how your network is built and how to deploy services. So the idea of transportation or the idea of delivering a network service, they understand how to build it from end to end and really how to construct those pieces in total. So now there was a strike by all the London cabs because Uber was coming into London. Now, how many of you seen the resistance to change, right? So think technology coming into the city of London has created this tension, as it has in many cities around the world, which is between things like Uber, which are automated instructions for anybody to follow, versus the person who has that deep knowledge that they can go from point A to point B. And so they went on strike, and they actually blocked the streets of London and brought the city to a halt as a result, because they didn't want to have any change. And in a very similar way, in a lot of our environments, we see resistance to automation from some of in our customers. So some customers are fully embracing it, some portions of some customers are fully embracing it, and others are saying, we don't really want to do anything different. This is very important. Maybe I'll just, again, how many of you are seeing any internal resistance to automation within your organizations? Okay, that's better participation than some of the earlier questions. So this is really a challenge. So it's important to realize that things like NSO aren't a new technology change, it's a culture change. And with culture change, you have a huge number of things that you have to think about as an organization. You have different barriers that you have to cross. And that's really an important thing as we kind of go through this and start to look at this. And there's a lot of companies, and there's even some countries where I spend time talking to their executives about, and this very carefully chosen words, right? How many of you have heard when somebody says something like, well, we can reduce the number of people you need through automation, okay? Never say that in certain countries because of job laws. We can make your workforce more efficient. That's what you say, okay? Making the workforce more efficient is much better than reducing the number of people you need. But this is part of where the culture comes in, because the culture of employment in some countries and some of our customers is we have to keep as many people employed as possible. We cannot let people go because the government will regulate us in a certain way. So then we have to talk about what automation does for your business in a very different way, as opposed to just reducing number of people and how you use people. So it's a culture shift as much as technology. So when we look at sort of the idea of the service across this map, the things that have changed is that the idea of the knowledge for the London cabbie was based on the fact that the information base was printed and that it wasn't real time, it was historical. So if they built a new street, the cabbie had to learn the new street, it wasn't automatically updated. So today we have so much more information available to us, and it's also dynamic information. It's dynamic information about the routes, it's dynamic information about the traffic, it's dynamic information about the cost of that route. So all of these things are updated dynamically, and we can now make decisions in real time, but we can also start to think about how we look at the idea of a service at a global level, so from a higher level, rather than right where we are at any given time. And so just like the autonomous car is not the service, the cab isn't actually the service, it's the transportation from end to end, and the London cabbie was the owner of that service. Now, how do we change that into really being sort of something that's driven by the idea of a top-down and enabling the service to scale and be automatic? So it's really about changing the field and the way we look at these things. So this also requires some enabling technologies such as GPS. So we look at NSO as sort of an enabling technology in the world of automation. And it's really without enabling technologies, these changes aren't possible. And it really is about creating much more scalable solutions. And I can't come to a developer conference without mentioning Dijkstra. So I see a few smiles on faces for Dijkstra. But the idea is that Dijkstra invented all the shortest path algorithms, for those of you who are not familiar with Dijkstra. And by the way, he did it while sitting on a porch and having a drink without any pencil and paper. He writes about this and how don't use a pencil and paper to solve problems, use your imagination and a drink on a porch. So I think that on the cruise this evening, make sure that you're thinking about problems without any pencil and paper and a drink in your hand in order to solve problems. I also want to point out, though, that by the way, that London cabbies do all that Dijkstra algorithm in their head when they're driving along. So there is value there. Now, one of the things that we often sometimes forget when we're doing a lot of automation is that your service might be part of a bigger service. So it's not just about that problem you're solving locally. You tend to solve problems in your domain. And this is where really thinking about what is the bigger service that you're a part of, so sub-services. So each domain can have its own automation and be part of a bigger service. And the idea about scaling domains is really where that idea of really delivering services comes from. Because it's not just within one domain, but really thinking about an end-to-end. Because really, as your service becomes part of a bigger service, what your company is trying to achieve becomes the outcome. And then you can also start to look at richer information across those services. So for example, instead of just being how long is it going to take to get there, you can think about, okay, what are the different paths to get there? What are the costs of those paths, both economically as well as time-wise? How do I start to create trade-offs between those things in this case? Right? If you think about travel agencies, right? Travel agencies, how do you get from point A to point B? The service is I want to go on a trip. So you get the trip, and then there's the actual trip itself. Information for two different types of consumers to build services in a much bigger way. This is how we get to a much more sort of scalable outcome in terms of, and how we start to think about services being delivered in different ways. Now, there's another law called Conway's Law. How many of you know what Conway's Law is? Ooh, that's a small number. All right, so Conway's Law is really simple. If you don't really work hard, your product will reflect your organization. As an example, if you have 4 managers on a compiler team, you will have a 4-stage compiler. Okay, it's just that simple. So your organization gets reflected in your product. So if you don't think about how things look and what the end consumption looks like, your products will end up reflecting your organization. So you have to think about your service and how it's tying to the services on either side. It's incredibly important. So when we look at a lot of our customers tend to start very much from a bottoms-up starting point. They think about, how am I going to really sort of automate a couple of things at the very bottom? So I want to hide sort of some complexity in terms of devices I'm talking. So this is where we see the vast majority of our customers that are starting to use NSO. They start with, I don't want to touch the device. That's a very good concept, by the way. That it's better to have software touching your device than it is to have humans touching your device. For those of you who don't know the statistic, in a network, approximately 70% of network problems are a direct result of a human on a keyboard interacting with a device. They fat finger it, they sort of put in the wrong thing. It's just really simple, 70%. So if you can eliminate 70% of those problems, that's a great thing. But we see most of our customers starting with, how do I take these things on the bottom and make them normalized? That's absolutely fantastic use of NSO, but it's a very basic use of NSO. It doesn't really take advantage of the power and the capabilities of what we're providing here. It gives you error reduction. That's great. It gives you standardization of your environment. Now, we see a lot of people taking what they call MOPS, or methods of procedure, and converting them into scripts on top of NSO. Let me give you there's a customer that we've been working with that was their first use case, is to get that pervasive across their network so they don't have any more humans touching it. They had an access network that had 3 types of devices. And they had a few thousand of those devices across, several, which spanned across several different organizations. Now, across 3 types of devices, across probably 15 organizations, how many variations in MOPS, or methods of procedure, do you think that they found through that? This would be a great time to have Menti, by the way, right? How many variations do you think they found in that? Somebody shout out a number. 45? Higher or lower? Higher, okay. Another number. 100? Higher or lower? 200? Higher or lower? How many employees? About right. Now, it's pretty close. 270, okay? 3 devices across about 15 organizations, 270 variations in scripts that touch those devices. So independent of whether those scripts worked or not, if they wanted to do something different, that meant they had to go and touch 270 locations, 270 scripts in order to deploy, I don't know, a new parameter. Forget a new service, a new parameter, right? So imagine this. By the way, this is not unusual for the broader customer base, right? And so they went right after just like, let's normalize the human touch, which is great. That gets a lot of errors out. But this is really about cost savings and efficiency more than it is anything else. Now, this is a point where I want to stop and say, if you think about the board of any company, what are the things they care about? Cost savings. They care about cost savings. What else? Income. Yep, bottom line. So I want to be really careful. So cost savings and bottom line are great, but if you have declining or not growing revenue, your investors will throw out the CEO. Okay? So the interesting part is this is all about cost savings and efficiency. But top line growth is the #1 priority for almost every board of every company. It doesn't matter whether you're an enterprise or a service provider. So it's really important to think about this in a very different way as we look forward, because we start to say, what does it mean from a top-down automation perspective? Because I think about this very differently. Top-down automation requires a totally different approach than bottoms-up. Because top-down, we're really starting to think about the services we want to deliver. And if you think about the services you want to deliver, the services are what your end customers are consuming, right? So it doesn't matter whether it's a video service or a transportation service. The service is what your customers are consuming. It's the thing that you charge revenue. That's how you get revenue. It's the thing you charge for. But you also have to often think across, network, IT, financial domains, because if you're talking about a mobile customer, okay? If you want to just add a mobile customer, you have to provision them in the billing system. You have to provision them in the network. You have to provision them across all sorts of different databases. So if you want to do that in a totally automated fashion, you have to think about that from a top-down perspective in terms of delivering that service. And you have to think across all of these domains in a way that allows you to start with what is it I'm trying to achieve rather than just what am I trying to expose from the bottom up. And the interesting part is that when you think top down, if you can get your company to approach it from this way, you can isolate the individual domains so that you don't have to have every domain fully automated to start at the top. But when you start at the top, it gives you the interesting ability to start thinking about how you build and deliver services much more quickly. Because even if coming out of a changed service model, you end up with a work order that somebody goes and executes, and you have other areas that are automated, at least you can change your service orders. Now, we're seeing this become much more prevalent with some of our customers, because the new mode of competition, particularly in the networking business, is about changing service models. And if you think about this in the service provider business, right, it's really about how can you differentiate your service and how can you package things differently and how can you deliver it. And the enterprise, it ultimately becomes how can you offer the different things to your ends of lines of business and how can you deliver those services much more rapidly. And it's not all from the bottoms up, because when you work from the bottoms up, you start with efficiency. But when you start at the top, I can change which services I'm offering much more rapidly. And we see the customers that have really focused on doing that are able to change their business model or their billing model much more quickly. So if you look at like the mobile phone industry, for instance, you'll see that most of the competition to pull customers away is much more based on, I'm going to change my package for what you get billed for and what you don't get billed for. So this is really like, you don't get billed for any Netflix consumption, or you don't get billed for any YouTube consumption out of your data plan. That actually requires changes in multiple systems, as well as how the network does accounting for traffic. And this is just changing at the service level, not necessarily at the bottom. So really, it's about enabling rapid changes in services, and it also allows you to really be much more competitive. So the top-down design is really about service agility and revenue generation, and how do you drive that, as opposed to just the efficiency. So the bottom line is very important, but the top line is very important. So as we kind of go through this, it really gets down to how do you bring the top line and the bottom line together and create that nirvana where you can bring it together, right? So if the bottom line is about saving money and it's about exposing value northbound and reducing costs, how can you be thinking about that from a top-down perspective and consumption, and look at how you can work across that? So this is really thinking about not just how do I save money at the bottom, but how do I make money? How do I expose it? If you don't have both, you're only realizing half the potential of automation. Because automation, if you just go into the savings piece, you're not actually achieving the larger business outcomes. And I'll give you an example. How many of you have a hard time getting funding for automation? So you guys all get funded for automation. Let me ask the question the other way. How many of you are fully funded for automation in your company, no problem? Okay, we've reduced participation, okay? So I got 5 respondents out of the whole organization. I talked to your executives. You know what they say? I can't fund automation on existing services because I have to invest money in stuff I've already paid for. I need to invest for automation in new services, or as I'm migrating services. So it's how do I invest in it in a way that for projects that get funded. So it's really about making sure that everything you do and being able to span as you go in that. So that's why having a top-down approach, allowing yourself to span newer services and older services, which may not be fully automated, is incredibly important. So this is really about how you can span your organizations, how you can span them, and actually allow existing organizations to keep their tools. Because, let's face it, engineers are passionate about their tools, right? So if you can span that in a way that allows you to talk to whatever subdomain and whatever tool chain that they're using, you can now isolate that one and leave that one and start to recognize the value across in a horizontal way. So it's really important that you have a blueprint for automation, not just invest in automation, but have a blueprint for automation within your domains and across your business from a top-down perspective. And this is really about how a lot of our customers make investment decisions. They make investment decisions in automation by understanding what their blueprint is, and if they're going to deploy a new service, to invest towards that blueprint. So by having a blueprint, you actually can drive more investment in the automation. So if we look at NSO and this, NSO is a perfect platform for driving sort of between the layers, because NSO, despite the fact that we often have these conversations about what we call NEDs, right, around talking to network elements, NSO's core competency is taking service models and deconstructing them into resource models. That resource at that next layer may be a subdomain, which it could even be another NSO instance taking a sub-service model. So when you think about what the opportunity is, it's not just at the bottom layer. It's to actually think about how you can have a layered approach to delivering services. It's really about not only how you give bottoms-up consistency and efficiency and really enable multi-vendor capability, but it's also about top down and how you can create services, because services come from a horizontal value perspective. And how do you drive that value across so that you can see that the service starts to be the thing that you can deliver, and that's the part where you start to look at revenue. Because revenue actually becomes more important to the company, because if you have more revenue, you have more money to spend. So it's a very simple equation, right? If you get a pay raise, you can spend more money on other things. It's the same thing for a company. You have to deliver more services, and you have to be able to do them more efficiently in terms of delivering that service and more flexibly in order to be able to generate new revenue, which then allows you to fund all the other things. So if you think about this really from the top down, NSO is a great platform for taking service models and deconstructing them into sub-services across domains or all the way into devices. It adds a lot of that value. So I have many customers that we engage with where there's terms like master service orchestrator. So that's a term that some of our customers use, and it can mean, it's got different names in customers, but it's the orchestrator of orchestrators. NSO is a platform that enables you to do that. It isn't just a platform that allows you to talk to network devices much more efficiently. So I think that's the one thing that we see having a hard switch with a lot of our customers and moving away from, and I'll be honest, some of this is our marketing, because we called it NSO with the N, network, when in fact the idea of a sub-underlying service or resource doesn't have to be network, actually. It's something that consumes a model or able to be talked to from a model. So that's really where we see how we start to look at NSO being able to deliver horizontal value of the service chain across those different domains, as well as vertical value by exposing the capabilities from the underlying components. So it's a key tool in how you think about your automation, both bottoms up as well as tops down. So we see that as fundamental, and that's why that middle layer of our customers is really where we see the biggest opportunity for NSO, and that's where almost all of you come from. So kind of going back to, instead of why am I here with a question, it's why I am here, right? It's very much about, this is the community for success. This is the community of developers for NSO. These are the people, you are the people, not these, you are the people who are delivering actual results with NSO. You're taking NSO, you're implementing in your networks, you're talking to, whether it's your devices or your subdomains, and starting to deliver those services. And this is the opportunity for you to start working across as a community, not just engaging with the white shirt folks, right, the experts, but to engage with each other and learn from each other. Because it's one of the great challenges in the networking world, we talked about culture before, is the networking culture doesn't have a lot of sharing in it. And this is what we really, our goal is with the NSO Developer Days and the NSO NSO sort of developer conference, is start to develop sort of cross-company collaboration, because the more you collaborate, the more you share. That helps us because you learn from each other. Communities are really what make the difference in how things develop. And better automation and sort of needs to be from a tops down and a bottom up, which ends up driving business much faster. And the business speed is really what enables the funding for you to do more projects. And this is an area where, when we talk at the level in your companies of the people funding projects, they always say, how can I make more money? So we had a great talk at Cisco Live, and I think that there's a talk from the Equinix folks later. The answer from them was the business case is really simple. Time to activation of a service. Plain and simple. If you can activate a customer in a quarter of the time through automation, you get a better customer experience. That customer wants to stay with you longer, and it's what helps drive customer stickiness and revenue. So really, speed in driving business. Faster development time for new services, faster activation time for services, and overall the lower cost of experimentation. So We love to use these terms like fail fast, which really should be learn fast. So the idea is that you need to be able to experiment. Experiment with what your customers want. Be able to experiment with what your service should look like. You can only do that if you have very rapid capability to develop and deliver that. And that's really what experimentation comes through rapid development. NSO is a tool that gives us the ability to do that. And in the end, the one thing I really want to encourage you is make sure that you're talking to the consumers of your service, to your lines of business that you're serving as you look forward. Because remember, the consumers of what you're developing are not just yourselves. It's really the people on either side of you organizationally that you're trying to, because the idea of a service chain means you have to put all these services together, and how do you fit? What are the things you want to provide across that? So it's really about not just the things you're trying to achieve, but think about how you engage across the lines in your company so that you don't end up with that Conway's Law effect. And then ultimately, there's a very famous quote from Jason Jennings, which is, it's not the big that eat the small, it's the fast that eat the slow. So we really see this as being able to speed up your business is the thing that makes competitive differentiation. And if you look at where every challenger out there in the industry has come in, is that they can do things much more quickly. And it's the companies that move very slow that tend to sort of have a really hard time maintaining customers and be dragged down. So it's really about speed of delivery, speed of service, how you can give that to your customers much more quickly. So I'll just give a few minutes if there's any questions, otherwise. All right, thank you very much.